She didn't take her phone. She didn't take her wallet. She didn't take her keys. She didn't even turn off the stove. She stepped into the hallway slowly, as if she wasn't in a hurry at all. She paused for a second, turned back, and smiled faintly. Not a smile meant for anyone, just a reflex. She said she would be back in 10 minutes. Those words were never meant to matter. They weren't dramatic. They weren't emotional. They didn't sound important. They were ordinary. But they became the last thing anyone ever heard from her. What makes this story unsettling isn't the violence. It isn't the crime itself. It's how quiet everything was while it happened. How normal it all felt. Nothing about her life suggested she was in danger. She wasn't hiding from anyone. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't planning to disappear. She lived in a quiet neighborhood. The kind where people recognize faces but rarely learn names. Neighbors passed each other in the hallways every day. They nodded. Sometimes they smiled. They never stopped. No one ever asked questions. She worked a stable job. She showed up on time, did what was expected of her, left when the day was over. She paid her bills. She answered messages when she felt like it, ignored them when she didn't. She wasn't social, but she wasn't isolated either. She had friends she met occasionally, family she spoke to every now and then. She just preferred routine. The same grocery store every week, the same walking route home, the same coffee mug every morning. Her life followed patterns, and patterns make people feel safe. When police later asked people about her, the answers sounded almost identical. Quiet, polite, independent. The kind of person who doesn't cause problems. The kind of person who doesn't draw attention. She had lived in that apartment for almost 8 years. Long enough for it to stop feeling temporary. Long enough for it to feel permanent. Long enough to disappear into it completely. The building itself wasn't dangerous. It wasn't known for crime. No warnings. No headlines. It was just old. Long hallways that echoed at night. Dim lights that buzzed softly and flickered when no one was around. Security cameras installed years ago. Some working. Some frozen on the same frame forever. People came and went at all hours. Doors opened. Doors closed. Everyone lived close together, but separately. If someone argued behind a wall, no one asked why. If someone cried late at night, no one knocked. Silence was normal there. And silence makes it easy for things to happen without being noticed. The day she disappeared began like any other. She woke up, got dressed, went to work. She spoke to co-workers, finished her tasks, left at the usual time. No one noticed anything strange. No one remembers anything unusual. Later, they would say she seemed normal, maybe a little tired, but tired was normal too. She returned home in the early evening, put her bag down near the door, changed into comfortable clothes. She filled the kettle with water and turned it on. The apartment was quiet, too quiet to remember later. At 7:14 p.m., she sent her last message. It wasn't important. It wasn't emotional. Just a normal reply. Something she had sent hundreds of times before. She stepped outside without thinking about it. 10 minutes. That's all she planned to be gone. She didn't lock the door. She thought she would be right back. She didn't expect to be gone long. That was clear in everything she left behind. The door stayed unlocked. The lights stayed on. Inside the apartment, the kettle continued to heat the water. A quiet, familiar sound she had heard hundreds of times before. She stepped outside wearing what she had on at home. Not dressed to go anywhere. Not dressed to meet anyone important. 10 minutes. That was the plan. A neighbor would later say he saw her near the entrance of the building. It was early evening. The hallway lights were already on. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't talking to anyone. She stood still for a moment, not pacing, not checking her phone, waiting. He remembered it because it felt out of place. People usually moved through that space quickly. She didn't. Security footage from a small convenience store 2 blocks away captured her silhouette. A few minutes later, The camera quality was poor, the image grainy. She stood near the entrance but didn't go inside. She didn't look around nervously. She didn't hesitate. She positioned herself slightly away from the light, just enough to stay partially hidden. At 7:21 p.m., she stepped out of frame. That moment mattered more than anyone realized at the time. No one followed her on camera. At least, no one who could be clearly seen. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. Inside the apartment, the kettle boiled dry and shut itself off automatically. The water evaporated slowly, filling the room with steam that no one saw. The teacup she had taken out sat in the sink, empty, untouched. The night passed quietly. No messages were sent. No calls were made. When she didn't return, nothing happened. No one panicked. No one called the police. She was an adult. Adults leave sometimes. Friends assumed she was busy or needed space. By the next morning, concern was still mild. Her phone remained silent. Unread messages stacked up. Silence wasn't unusual for her. She wasn't someone who checked in constantly. Family waited longer than they should have. When police were finally contacted, the report didn't sound urgent. Adult female. No signs of distress. Possible voluntary absence. That phrase changed everything. Because once a disappearance is labeled voluntary, time stops working in your favor. Officers entered her apartment later that day. They expected to find something wrong. A sign. A clue. They didn't. Everything was exactly where it should be. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her shoes by the door. Her phone was fully charged on the table. Notifications unanswered. Her wallet was inside her bag. Cards untouched. Cash still there. Her passport was in a drawer. She hadn't packed anything. She hadn't planned to leave, which meant whatever happened outside that building was sudden, unplanned, and irreversible. The investigation didn't start with urgency. It started slowly, carefully, because there was nothing obvious to chase. No signs of forced entry, no broken items, no struggle. The apartment looked untouched, almost staged by how normal it felt. Investigators began with routine questions. When was the last time anyone heard from her? Who did she spend time with? Did she mention wanting to leave? The answers led nowhere. Co-workers said she seemed normal. Friends said she hadn't complained about anything. Family said she hadn't mentioned problems or plans. There were no warning signs. As the days passed, theories filled the silence. She left voluntarily. She needed time alone. She wanted to start over. Those theories were easy, comfortable. They explained the absence without forcing anyone to look deeper. But there were details that didn't fit. Her phone, her wallet, her passport. People who leave don't usually leave everything behind, especially not their identity. Police returned to the building. They spoke to neighbors again. Most couldn't remember much. They remembered seeing her. They remembered her face, but nothing else. No one remembered hearing anything unusual that night. No arguments, no shouting. That absence of noise became important. Security footage from inside the building was incomplete. Some cameras worked, others hadn't recorded for weeks. But one clip stood out. A man exiting the building shortly after she did. Less than a minute later. Same door, same direction. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look suspicious. He looked normal. He lived one floor below her. When police spoke to neighbors about him, the descriptions sounded familiar. Quiet, polite, kept to himself. Forgettable. That word came up again. Forgettable people don't stand out. They don't attract attention. They exist in the background. When questioned, he said he went for a short walk that evening. He said he didn't see her. Nothing in his statement could be immediately disproven. No witnesses. No cameras. At first, there was no reason to hold him. But his name appeared in police records. Not for violence. Not for assault. For something smaller. A complaint filed years earlier. An incident that never led to charges. The file had been closed quickly. Not enough evidence. At the time, it hadn't seemed important. Now, It felt different. Investigators wanted to look closer, but without evidence, there was little they could do. Days passed, then weeks. The case slowed. The absence became normal. And that was when the real damage happened. Because time doesn't just erase evidence, it erases urgency. As the weeks passed, the case quietly lost momentum. There were no press conferences, no breaking news alerts. Her disappearance didn't look dramatic from the outside. No witnesses came forward. No new footage appeared. Without fresh leads, the investigation slowed. Search efforts were reduced. Posters were taken down or faded in the sun. People stopped asking questions. But time didn't stop for her family. They retraced her routine again and again. The same streets, the same entrances. They asked the same questions. Why would she leave without her phone? Why would she leave her wallet? Why would she leave everything behind? There were no answers. Police returned to the man from the building, not because they had proof, but because nothing else made sense. This time, the questions were more detailed. Timelines were compared. Small inconsistencies appeared. He said he went out for a short walk, but couldn't say exactly where. He said he returned quickly, but couldn't explain why no one saw him come back. None of it was enough. Suspicion without evidence doesn't hold in court. Investigators reviewed his past again. The old complaint resurfaced. Still minor. Still unresolved. At the time, it had been easy to dismiss. Now, it felt like a missed warning. But warnings only matter before something happens. Afterward, they become regrets. Months passed. The case was still technically open, but quietly. Files gathered dust. Calls came in less frequently. Her name was no longer mentioned in meetings. The city moved on. People continued walking past the building every day. Past the same entrance. Past the same hallway. Nothing marked the place where she was last seen. Nothing suggested something terrible had happened there. Then, one morning, everything changed. Construction workers outside the city were clearing land, preparing the area for development. They found something that didn't belong. At first, they didn't understand what they were looking at. Then they did. Authorities were called. The site was secured. What they found had been exposed to the elements for months. Weather had erased details. Time had taken the rest. Identification wasn't immediate. Days passed before confirmation arrived. It was her. The medical report was brief. Clinical. She had died the same night she disappeared. There were no signs of a struggle. No defensive wounds. No evidence that she fought back, which suggested something far worse than violence. It suggested trust. The discovery forced investigators to reopen everything. What had once been a quiet disappearance was now a confirmed death. Timelines were rebuilt from the beginning. Every minute mattered again. The medical report confirmed what many had feared. She had died the same night she vanished. Not days later. Not weeks later. That meant whatever happened occurred almost immediately after she stepped outside. There were no defensive wounds. No signs of a prolonged struggle. She hadn't fought, which meant she hadn't panicked. At least, not at first. Investigators returned to the building once more, this time with a different tone. Questions were sharper. Details were examined more closely. They focused again on the man who lived one floor below her. When questioned after the discovery, his story hadn't changed much, but small details no longer lined up. The length of his walk, the route he claimed to take, the time he said he returned. Each version was close, but not exact. Those differences mattered now. Police searched for anything that could place him with her that night. Cameras, witnesses, receipts. Nothing definitive appeared. The old complaint in his file was reviewed again, this time with more attention. It described behavior that now felt familiar, uncomfortable, dismissed too quickly at the time. Back then, it hadn't been enough. And now, it still wasn't. Suspicion grew quietly, but suspicion alone doesn't make a case. No physical evidence tied him to her. No witnesses saw them together. No confession came. The investigation stalled again, not because police stopped caring, but because there was nowhere left to push. Her family waited for answers that never came. They attended meetings, read reports, asked the same questions over and over. Why didn't anyone act sooner? Why wasn't she searched for immediately? There were no good answers. The case was labeled unsolved, officially open, practically frozen. Time passed once more, and the space where answers should have been remained empty.